Thank you for joining me as I continue my examination of The Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel, reviewing it from my atheist perspective. In this video, I'm going to cover Chapter 5 of the book, The Evidence of Cosmology, Beginning with a Bang. So why don't we begin? Not with a bang, just however we do. Strobel begins the chapter by pondering the question, which he once read on the cover of a magazine: where did everything come from? The ancient Hebrews believed they had the answer to that question. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But does that agree with how cosmologists now say the universe began? Well, only in the most general way. And why would we extend special privileges to the biblical creation story? Lots of religions have creation stories. Lots of those stories depict a god or some other supernatural force or event creating the universe. But for some reason, Christian apologists like Strobel insist that the Big Bang is evidence that their holy book, and only their holy book, has it right. Well, Strobel resolves to answer the question. What does science say about the beginning of the universe? Are there explanations from outside of science for how the universe began, for what caused the Big Bang, that fit the facts? Strobel says, quote, "I knew this investigation would take me into the slippery world of theoretical physics, where it's sometimes difficult to discern between what's profoundly scholarly and what's just plain silly. As for myself, I wasn't interested in unsupported conjecture or armchair musings by pipe-puffing theorists. I wanted the hard facts of mathematics, the cold data of cosmology, and only the most reasonable inferences that can be drawn from them. And that's what sent me to Georgia to visit the home of a widely published expert who has studied and debated these issues for decades. And who is this expert? Strobel has chosen to guide him through the slippery world of theoretical physics, this respected interpreter of the hard facts of mathematics and the cold data of cosmology, this person who is anything but an indulger in unsupported conjecture, who is by no means an armchair muser. Who is this titan of physics and science, this person, this peerless expert in all of these incredibly complex fields who will... It's William Lane Craig. I'm sorry. I got stuck and I couldn't think of it's William Lane Craig. It's William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig, who is not a cosmologist or a physicist or any kind of scientist, whose education was in the fields of theology and philosophy, whose work is not taken remotely seriously by anyone outside of the Christian apologist/evangelical communities, especially in scientific circles. I just want to remind you that the Discovery Institute has a list of nearly 1,000 credentialed scientists who are skeptical of evolution. Presumably, a few of those are also sympathetic to Strobel's The Big Bang supports the Bible case. I bet there might even be some of those who are cosmologists or physicists or professionals in some other relevant field to the topic. There aren't a lot of them relative to the overall scientific community. Their views are not at all representative of the broad scientific consensus, but they exist. They're proper scientists. And I'm quite sure Strobel could have found one of them willing to speak to him for this book. And if Strobel were serious about the stated purpose of the book, he would have chosen to speak to one of them, or better yet, to a proper cosmologist or physicist who wasn't on the Discovery Institute's list, because if he's concerned about getting the best facts necessary, why not speak to a scientist who would represent the consensus? Why not interrogate that person? Why not question that? Anyway, instead, he's chosen to speak to William Lane Craig, a person he knows will tell him exactly what he wants to hear and what he expects. Strobel even tells us that he doesn't need directions to Craig's house, Because he's been there so many times and has interviewed him for 2 previous books. Why would an objective journalist who only cares about the facts keep interviewing the same unqualified person? Strobel prompts Craig to explain the Kalam cosmological argument. As soon as I said he's going to interview William Lane Craig, you knew we were going to talk about the Kalam. Well, the argument is presented in 3 basic steps. Here's the Kalam cosmological argument. Those of you who have heard this 1,000 times before, feel free to say it with me. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Logic. Craig expresses his astonishment that people actually try to argue with the first premise of this argument. Of course, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Things don't just pop into existence uncaused. Well, here's the point Craig always misses, either honestly or intentionally. When people question his first premise there, they aren't saying they know for a fact that the universe began to exist without a cause. They're pointing out that Craig is basing his premise on rules that we have no way of knowing if they apply. The principle of cause and effect is sound and inviolable, so far as we can tell, within our universe. Our universe, again, so far as we can tell, is closed and self-contained. That includes all the time, space, matter, energy, laws of physics, everything we can see or experience. Perhaps if there is a realm of existence beyond our universe, or there was one prior to the Big Bang, that realm operates according to the same rules as our universe. And the principle of cause and effect holds true. But perhaps that is not the case. We just don't know. And at this point, we can't know, because we have no way of accessing any information from before the Big Bang, from outside of our universe. We have no way of knowing if the rules of this place applied when this place was created. Craig tries to make it sound like people who argue with premise 1 of his argument are grasping at straws and showing how desperate they are to refute him. Why, they'll even insist that effect doesn't need to precede cause. What other fundamental principles of logic will they toss out in order to keep denying God? But no one is saying that the principle of cause and effect doesn't apply here, in this universe, under our present conditions. They're just pointing out that this universe, with all its laws of physics and logic, did not exist prior to the Big Bang. Therefore, we cannot be certain that the everything which begins to exist has a cause rule would apply to the universe itself. When Strobel asks Craig for evidence, he even appeals to empirical experience. He says, we never see this principle falsified. We never see things coming into existence uncaused, out of nothing. But all of those experiences occur in this universe, where we know the principle of cause and effect applies. They aren't necessarily relevant to the circumstances that surrounded the beginning of this universe, because this universe and its laws, including cause and effect, didn't exist yet. Well, what about step 2 of the Kalam? The universe had a beginning. Prior to the discovery of the Big Bang, it was generally accepted that the universe had always existed. Christians have denied this on the basis of biblical revelation, Craig says, but secular science always assumed the universe's eternality. Until secular science yielded evidence that the universe was not eternal and in fact had a beginning, because that's how science works. Science doesn't just pick an answer and continue to defend it no matter what the evidence seems to say. Science demands that we change our minds to reflect the story the evidence tells us. Craig runs through all the ways that an actual infinity is absurd. And this is Craig's greatest hits. Anybody who's watched one of my previous series on Craig or has listened to Craig talk about these issues for any length of time has heard him hit these beats over and over and over again. The man always uses the same script every time. Actual infinities are absurd. You can't possibly have an infinite past. There can't be an infinite number of past days. You can't traverse the infinity. You can't get to infinity by simply adding one after the other after the other. We've heard all of these arguments before. When Strobel asks how that applies to God, who Christians believe to be eternal, Craig explains that God has existed for eternity, but that time is a creation of God. So before he created time, when he created the universe, he simply existed in eternal timelessness. God can enter time now that he's created it, but he essentially exists beyond it. So that argument doesn't apply to God. Well, if you're willing to assume that, why not just assume that there is some timeless realm in which the universe exists? If Craig is willing to propose the totally unsubstantiated existence of an all-powerful eternal being, surely it's just as or more reasonable to propose the existence of a timeless eternity, just a place, just a state of existence, a level of reality that preceded the existence of our universe. That way you can accommodate the findings of science, which say that time and space began with the Big Bang, but you can also assume that the larger reality, wherever and whatever it is, in which our universe exists, in which the Big Bang took place, is eternal. But you don't have to add the unwarranted assumptions of a conscious, intelligent, omnipotent entity. Craig wouldn't go for that, of course, because insisting that the conscious, intelligent, omnipotent entity must exist is demanded by logical necessity, is the whole point of his act. But still. There's also observational evidence for the universe having a beginning. The universe is expanding. We know this. We've taken measurements. That means that at a certain point in the past, the universe was much, much smaller than it is now. The Big Bang is the common name given to the initial expansion of the universe, when that tiny, tiny, tiny universe began to expand into the universe that we see today. Again, none of this has anything to do with arguments for the existence of God or the truth of Christianity. The Big Bang was discovered by astronomers and cosmologists and physicists working in their fields, developing theories, making observations, testing predictions, not by theologians studying Scripture. There's nothing in the Bible or any other holy book about the Big Bang. Strobel asks Craig about the various refinements to Big Bang theory that have been introduced over the years. He mentions cosmic inflation. But Craig responds, personally, I think the reasons for scientists accepting inflation are a bit suspect. Oh, please tell me what your problems with the theory of cosmic inflation are, person who is not a scientist. Craig declares that inflation is a bad theory because the Big Bang was not a chaotic, disorderly event. Why does he say this? Because the universe appears to have been fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life, which means that the Big Bang was not an accident, but rather the product of a design. You know, most of Strobel's readers probably won't catch what Craig is doing there, but he's essentially rejecting a theory because he prefers the problem the theory was created to solve. The appearance of fine-tuning in the early universe is something cosmologists have tried to explain, and one possible explanation that is now widely, though certainly not universally accepted, is the theory of cosmic inflation. Craig is rejecting cosmic inflation not for any of the reasons scientists who understand the theory and the nature of the problem it addresses have for rejecting it, those who do reject it, but simply because it attempts to explain something that Craig needs to be inexplicable by science. Because if science can explain the appearance of fine-tuning, then there's no need to appeal to God to explain it. Also, the fine-tuning problem in cosmic inflation has nothing to do with the creationist notion that the universe was fine-tuned for our benefit. It refers to the problem that in order for the universe as we see it now to have resulted from the Big Bang, certain conditions right after the Big Bang had to be just right, or else the universe we see today would be very different than it is. There are various explanations that have been proposed for that, including inflation, but none of them, or at least none of them that have been proposed or taken seriously by very many professional scientists, invoke God or some other intelligent designer. Well, on to step 3 of the Kalam. Therefore, the universe has a cause. We've already gone over why the universe might not have had a cause, so let's skip to Craig claiming that you can know things about the cause simply from the knowledge that there was a cause and knowing about some very basic characteristics of the universe. Strobel asks what we can deduce about the cause of the universe. Nothing. That's the honest answer. Nothing. And Alan Sandage, the great astronomer who converted to Christianity, who was mentioned several times in the previous video, agrees with me. He said that simply knowing or believing that the universe had a cause tells you nothing whatsoever about the nature of that cause. Well, Craig disagrees. Craig declares that because the cause of the universe was the cause of space and time and matter, the cause must itself be uncaused, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, personal, with free will and enormous power. Those are 8 things that he says we can deduce simply from knowing or thinking we know that there was a cause to our universe. And that is a core concept of God, he adds, those 8 characteristics. Craig is speaking as though he knows more about the circumstances of the creation of the universe than he actually knows, than anyone actually knows. How does he know the cause of the universe must itself be uncaused? If the cause of the universe is uncaused, why can't the universe itself simply be uncaused? Because things which begin to exist must have a cause, but we've already been over that. We can't know that the rules of cause and effect are the same outside the universe as they are inside it. We can't apply the laws of our universe to events which preceded the existence of our universe with the same confidence that we apply it to events that take place in our universe. How does he know the cause of the universe must be timeless? Time as it exists in our universe began with the Big Bang, but does that mean there are no other realms of existence where time is a dimension of reality? We have no way of knowing that. How does he know the cause of the universe must be immaterial? Does it follow logically that whatever creates something cannot have the same properties as the thing created? No, it does not. Does it follow logically that a material universe cannot have been created by a material cause? No, it does not. We know nothing about what caused the universe, including whether or not there was a cause. We can deduce nothing about that cause from the universe it caused. That cause need not necessarily have been timeless, spaceless, immaterial, eternal. That cause need not necessarily have been personal or a being of enormous power. While creating the entire universe seems quite impressive to us as unimaginably tiny parts of that universe, perhaps it is a natural, ordinary thing when judged from the outside. We simply don't know any of the things Craig is insisting he knows. Strobel asks Craig how he knows the first cause was personal. And Craig says this, quote, "You see, there cannot be a scientific explanation of the first state of the universe. Since it's the first state, it simply cannot be explained in terms of earlier initial conditions and natural laws leading up to it. So if there is an explanation of the first state of the universe, it has to be a personal explanation. That is, an agent who has volition to create it. If the first state of the universe can't be explained in terms of earlier conditions or natural laws, how can it be explained in terms of cause and effect or other logical principles?" Craig himself, as you can see, is willing to argue that the laws of the universe can't be fairly applied to the creation of the universe, but only when it serves his purpose. When it directly contradicts his purpose, he appeals to those same laws and laughs at anyone who suggests they might not apply in this case. Craig goes on to insist that another reason the first cause must be personal is because it is also necessarily immaterial. And the only kinds of immaterial objects are abstract objects like numbers, which can't cause anything to happen by themselves, and a personal mind, which can cause things to happen. The first cause isn't necessarily immaterial, as we've just gone over, and a mind is the product of a brain, which is decidedly physical and material. Craig's argument here makes absolutely no sense. And I've never understood that from the moment I first heard him propose, well, what about a mind? A mind is immaterial and it can make things happen. How do you explain a mind? How do you explain consciousness without eventually getting to a materialistic explanation? And the only minds we've ever encountered, the minds of physical beings like us, need physicality in order to make things happen. The free will, the volition of a mind needs a physical component, even if you believe that the mind is somehow this supernatural, immaterial, abstract thing. A mind still needs a physical component in order to make things happen. Craig is not just proposing the existence of a mind and trying to pass it off by saying, oh, we know that minds are a thing, why couldn't it be a mind? He's also proposing the existence of an omnipotent entity that was physically capable of doing all of the things that it had to do to create the universe. You can't just say, well, a mind could have done it. No mind we've ever encountered could have done it, and a mind isn't immaterial. So it's just gibberish. It's just gibberish stated in a philosophical tone of voice with a great deal of confidence, so that people who don't know any better will hear that and go, oh yeah, interesting. Despite repeatedly describing how the Big Bang is well evidenced and overwhelmingly accepted by scientists, Strobel and Craig spend several pages going over alternatives to the theory, including a concept Stephen Hawking shares in his book, A Brief History of Time, which suggests that a self-contained but unbound universe would not require a creator. Craig points out that Hawking's model doesn't trace the universe's origin back to a singularity where the laws of physics break down, but it still traces the universe back to a beginning point. Craig also observes that Hawking's theory relies on imaginary numbers, which result in the theory showing the existence of a singularity if they are converted into real numbers. Hawking himself, who I think probably understood the questions at play here better than William Lane Craig, with all due respect, pointed out that theories that make use of imaginary numbers were able to predict things which we have observed in our real universe, and also a few things we haven't yet observed, but which we expect to see eventually. So Craig, characterizing these theories that use concepts like imaginary time or imaginary numbers as just being intellectual exercises that have no bearing on the real world is not accurate. Some theories that involve imaginary numbers or imaginary time do yield predictions that can be tested in the real world and shown to be valid. Anyway, Strobel writes, quote, "I was amazed. Even though Hawking's internet site says his theory implies that the universe was completely determined by the laws of science, even he wasn't able to successfully write God out of the picture. Why don't you get a scientist to explain Hawking's theories to you, Lee?" Actually, Strobel asks himself that question 2 pages later, quote, "I wondered, however, how a cosmologist or physicist might respond to Craig. As compelling as the Kalam argument undeniably is, does it really have the potential to change the mind of a scientist?" So he's going to go interview a proper scientist and ask them, right? Why else even bring it up? Nope. Strobel muses to Craig. That's how he puts it. I mused about this to Craig, about whether or not a scientist would be persuaded by the Kalam argument. And Craig responds by sharing an anecdote about a time when he shared his doctoral dissertation with a prominent Eastern European physicist, that's how this person is described, whose faith in God had been destroyed after studying physics. A few days later, the physicist returned the dissertation to Craig and said that she once again believed in God and thanked Craig for restoring her faith. And soon after that, she gave her life to Christ. Craig tells Strobel, "I've seen God use cosmology to change the life of a scientist." And by that, he means the Kalam argument. That's cosmology, apparently. So instead of interviewing a scientist about the Kalam argument and asking them if they found it to be persuasive or what their responses might be to it, Strobel just says, "Hey, Bill, does this Kalam argument actually persuade scientists who really know about this stuff?" And Craig says, "Yep, sure does." And Strobel, hard-nosed journalist caring only about the facts, goes, "Good enough for me. I was just wondering." Cool. William Lane Craig isn't a cosmologist. He isn't a scientist at all. He's a philosopher, and he's a shitty one of those. If you want someone to explain cosmology to you, you don't call William Lane Craig unless, as in Strobel's case, your interest in the truth is just a false pretense. And I have evidence, empirical evidence, that Lee Strobel is not interested in the truth, that he does not care about what is true as he wrote this book, because he references Stephen Hawking, and one of the things he mentions as he is explaining who Stephen Hawking is to his readers is that Stephen Hawking made a guest appearance on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it's true, Stephen Hawking is the only person, or at least the first person, there may have been a few people since him, but he's the first person to guest appear as himself in an episode of Star Trek. He appeared in a holographic simulation of Commander Data's, and Strobel references that as saying that Hawking appeared in a Star Trek episode, and in the scene where he appeared, he played chess with Albert Einstein. And any Trekkie worth their salt knows that it was not a scene of Hawking playing chess with Einstein. It was a scene of Hawking playing poker with Einstein and with Isaac Newton and with Data. So if you can't even get that right, if your research intern can't even get it right that Hawking played poker with Einstein instead of chess, I'm sorry, I'm throwing the whole thing out the window. Where are your journalistic standards, Lee Strobel? Okay, it's not that big of a deal, but come on, it's a little irritating. Anyway, that's it. I decided to end it with an irrelevant Star Trek rant, because why not? That's it for this chapter. I'll be back in the next video to take a look at Chapter 6 of The Case for a Creator, which is titled The Evidence of Physics, the Cosmos on a Razor's Edge. Is he going to interview Josh McDowell about that one? Or will he interview a proper physicist? We'll see. We'll find out. Thank you all for watching this. As always, as I say at the end of all of these videos, if you have a response to something I have said, whether you are an atheist or a Christian or some other category of believer or non-believer, please do leave a comment. Let me know what you think about what I have had to say, whether you agree or disagree. I'm always interested in your thoughts about my thoughts. And also, if you enjoy these videos that I do, please consider helping me to continue make videos on this channel, to finish out this series, and to move on with the rest of my video work in the future. Please consider helping me to do that by becoming a supporter of this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron of this channel for as little as $1 a month. And that really helps me out. If you pledge at higher levels, you can take advantage of some extra perks in the campaign, $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever you think I'm worth, whatever you can afford. It is greatly appreciated, just as it is greatly appreciated to all of you who watched, whether you are patrons or not. I appreciate all of you and your attention and your support, and I'll see you next time.